Dr. Adrian Wells had never considered himself extraordinary, for his days moved with the steadiness of a well-wound clock. At precisely 7 in the morning, he would rise from a thin-walled apartment in Midtown Manhattan, nestled between a modest bookstore and a tightly packed row of equally unassuming dwellings. Like any mortal man of measured intellect, he found comfort in the humdrum predictability of routine. He would brew a pot of black coffee, indulge in a brief moment of reflection over the pages of a worn medical journal, then embark on a brisk walk toward Novatech Labs. In that sprawling facility, dedicated to cutting-edge biomedical research, Adrian spent much of his life hunched over test tubes and gene sequencers. He specialized in the study of recombinant DNA therapies, forging cures for diseases that once plagued humanity. Yet despite the nobility of his efforts, Adrian could not help but feel a subtle ache, a yearning for something beyond the realm of molecules and carefully tabulated data points. His mind often drifted, recalling the dusty volumes of science fiction he had devoured in his youth, the stories that had once ignited his imagination. Now they lay dormant in the depths of memory, overshadowed by the immediate, practical demands of the modern world. Yet, the gentle monotony of his days was about to be splintered. An unknown current pulsed in the atmosphere around him, an energy that whispered of mystery. It began with the simple act of crossing paths with Selene Voss, his neighbor of 2 years, though she had largely remained a polite, fleeting presence in his life. He had seen her often from afar, a solitary figure gliding through the corridor with unearthly grace. She was tall, statuesque, with hair that caught the overhead lights like spun silver, even though it appeared a shade of ashen blonde. She always greeted him with a polite, reserved smile, yet rarely exchanged more than a few words. Adrian, in his usual tunnel vision mode, had never probed deeper into her life. One evening, however, chance forced them into proper conversation. Adrian had arrived home in a downpour, soaked to the bone by an unexpected summer storm. Fumbling for his keys, he found them lodged in the recesses of his tattered satchel. Selene appeared in the hallway, her eyes reflecting a peculiar luminescence under the flickering overhead bulb. With a low, measured voice, she asked if he needed assistance. It was the first time he truly heard her speak, and something within him stirred, an inexplicable sense of familiarity. He smiled awkwardly, murmuring a thanks as she helped him retrieve his keys. In that brief contact, the warmth of her skin startled him. A subtle prickle dashed across his fingertips. He brushed it off as static, but when she stepped back, he could have sworn he saw her eyes shift from pale gray to something akin to turquoise. A trick of the light, he told himself. Yet the moment lingered in his mind, well into the late hours of that night. Days passed, and she remained a gentle enigma in the periphery of his existence. But a single question had rooted itself in Adrian's mind. Who was Selene Voss, truly? His curiosity spiked further when, over the next few weeks, he observed her strange habits, like how she never seemed to forget a face or a detail, no matter how trivial. Once, she overheard him mention an obscure chemical compound in an elevator conversation with a coworker. Weeks later, she not only recalled the compound's name, but recited a list of synonyms, all with unfaltering clarity. These moments intrigued Adrian, for he was a man of science, and such feats of recall were rare, even among savants. Selene's subtle quirks, her distant demeanor, her unwavering posture, spoke of something entirely foreign to him. It was not the typical awkwardness or social anxiety he recognized in many brilliant but introverted colleagues. It was something else, an intangible aura that set her apart. But as intriguing as she was, Adrian never pressed her with questions. He remained content, for a time, to watch from a distance, collecting small puzzles that hinted at her otherworldly nature. Yet fate, with its ceaseless weaving, would not permit them to remain strangers for long. The entire building was shaken one crisp autumn night. The sky had been clear, the air sharp with the promise of encroaching winter. Adrian stood in his modest kitchen, flipping through research notes, when the power surged. Lights flickered, then died. A low hum filled the air, escalating into a crackling thunder. As he ventured out of his apartment to inspect the fuse box, he saw Selene in the hallway, clutching her head as if fighting off a searing pain. "Are you all right?" he called out, voice echoing along the walls. She did not respond at first, Her eyes were squeezed shut, her breath ragged. A moment later, the corridor's lights sputtered back on, though in a sickly, uncertain glow. Selene stumbled, and Adrian caught her before she could collapse. As she leaned against him, her frame trembling, he felt that same electric warmth emanate from her skin. Then, a thunderous clang reverberated. The building's main breaker had tripped, but that was not the strangest part. In the flickering lights, Adrian watched in stunned disbelief as Selene's features shimmered, as though superimposed upon her face was another visage, one slightly elongated, with eyes that glowed a faint aqua. The air crackled, sending the scent of ozone into his nostrils. And in a flash, the power stabilized, the corridor brightened, and Selene's face returned to normal. Yet the memory remained burned into Adrian's vision, more real than any phantom or trick of the light. He helped her into his apartment, guiding her to a chair. She took a moment to steady herself, her breathing still labored. Gone was her usual composure. At that instant, she appeared vulnerable, painfully aware of his scrutiny. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice a tremulous whisper. "Something just affected me. A high-level electromagnetic discharge, perhaps. It shouldn't have happened." Adrian stared at her, uncertain. Something in her tone implied she knew the cause, but dared not elaborate. The scientist in him reeled with questions. Why would an EMP or electromagnetic pulse single her out? And what had he seen during that flicker of chaos? But with deliberate calm, he suppressed his curiosity, if only momentarily. "Let me get you some water," he offered. She nodded with a weak smile, and so began the fragile camaraderie that bound them. Selene admitted that she needed a place to compose herself, and for reasons he could not fully articulate, Adrian allowed her to remain in his apartment. He offered her water and the solace of a quiet room. Beneath the overhead light, Selene's face bore an expression of deep worry. In the days that followed, Adrian's routine was disrupted. Overnight, the building's aging electrical grid had become the least of his concerns. Selene tried to evade his questions, speaking in vague half-truths about a personal medical condition. Adrian, unsettled by what he had witnessed, pressed gently. He was no stranger to the complexities of biology, but what he had seen defied conventional science. Yet, each time he ventured near the subject, her guardedness rose like an impenetrable wall. Still, small revelations emerged. She possessed knowledge well beyond her supposed background, comprehending advanced quantum theory and intricate biomedical processes with astonishing ease. Whenever Adrian dared to mention these anomalies, she would dismiss them politely, redirecting the conversation as deftly as a swordsman parrying a thrust. Despite her evasiveness, Adrian could not deny that a bond was forming. They discovered mutual interests: music, the geometry of fractals, the quiet solace of early morning walks. In those moments, when Selene allowed herself the barest glimmer of openness, Adrian sensed an almost childlike wonder beneath her stoic exterior. His life had become a swirl of confusion and awe, and though he tried to cling to the semblance of normalcy, he knew in his core that the threads of destiny were weaving a grander tapestry. Something about Selene was not of this world, and if he chose to remain at her side, he would be swept into an unknown realm of revelation and danger. But the moment of revelation arrived sooner than either of them expected, catalyzed by a second pulse. This one more powerful, more targeted. It came without warning, midday, when Adrian was leaving Novatech Labs. A wave of electromagnetic energy cascaded across the city block, plunging traffic lights into chaos, frying electronics, and blacking out entire sections of Manhattan. In the epicenter, among startled pedestrians, stood Selene, her carefully maintained disguise flickering like a failing hologram. Adrian, in disbelief, watched as her form shifted, revealing glimpses of luminous tattoos along her arms, symbols that glowed in the daylight. Her eyes, unveiled, were a translucent, otherworldly aqua, brimming with something beyond mere human expression. A terrified hush fell over the crowd. People fled, uncertain of the threat, or simply unprepared to face the impossible truth that one among them was not human. Before panic could fully break loose, an unmarked vehicle screeched to a halt, nearly colliding with the sidewalk. Men in black tactical gear jumped out, brandishing advanced weaponry with ominous efficiency. They seemed to know precisely who they were after. Selene, though momentarily disoriented, recognized them at once. She grabbed Adrian's wrist, pulling him along as they sprinted through the swirling crowd. His heart hammered in his chest. He did not know who these men were or the specifics of their intentions, but he could see the lethal determination in their eyes. He realized, with abrupt clarity, that Selene had been fleeing such entities for some time. The pursuit was desperate, weaving through side streets and narrow alleys, the stench of urban decay mixing with the acrid tang of fear. Cars honked in protest, and pedestrians looked on in confusion as the pair dashed across busy intersections, nearly struck by roaring engines and screeching tires. Eventually, they slipped into the labyrinthine refuge of a deserted subway entrance. Panting, Adrian braced himself against the cold tile wall, his mind aflame with questions. Selene's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, her face set in grim determination. "They've found me," she whispered, voice laced with dread. "It was only a matter of time. They've developed a pulse that disrupts our disguises, revealing us." Adrian could only gape, reeling with disbelief. "Who are they? And who are you?" A hesitant silence followed. Then, in halting words, she told him the truth she had guarded so fiercely. Her name was Selene, yes, but her origins lay light years from Earth. She belonged to the Elari, a peaceful race whose advanced bioengineering and shape-shifting abilities allowed them to walk among humans, studying, observing, gathering knowledge for reasons largely benign. The Elari had come to Earth not in conquest, but in quiet curiosity, forging small communities that integrated seamlessly into human society. Her confession opened a chasm of astonishment in Adrian's mind. Yet, beneath the shock, a sense of wonder stirred, recalling the boy who had once dreamt of cosmic frontiers. He listened, enthralled, as she described the ancient laws of her people, that any bond formed with a human had to be regulated, that their very existence on Earth was a guarded secret. Above all else, no human must discover their presence, lest it threaten their ability to coexist. Yet, here Adrian stood, a living witness. He felt he ought to be angry, or frightened, or both. But as he studied Selene's earnest expression, he felt something else, an urgent desire to protect her. She was no monster, no threat. She was vulnerable, an outsider driven from her home, hunted by forces unknown. The question loomed: who were these hunters? The men in black gear, so well prepared, so eager to capture or neutralize her kind. Their black SUV and advanced weaponry suggested a clandestine group with a near-limitless budget. Selene's mention of them building a specialized electromagnetic disruptor device indicated formidable scientific knowledge. In short, these men had resources and cunning in spades. "We can't stay here," said Adrian, as the rumble of a train echoed through the tunnels. "We should find somewhere safe." Selene nodded, releasing a shaky breath. "I need to contact my people, but it's complicated. We are scattered. Our networks are secret. There's also another threat. Kael Draven." She said the name with palpable tension. Adrian's curiosity flared anew. Kael Draven was once a member of the Elari Council, she explained. But he grew dissatisfied with our subtle approach, believing we should seize control of humanity through infiltration and forced integrations. He was exiled, but he's found supporters here on Earth. They manipulate human leaders, orchestrating events that pit nations against each other, sowing chaos to further his agenda. Adrian absorbed this, trying to stay grounded. The existence of extraterrestrials, exiled councils, infiltration, these concepts stretched the fabric of his reality. Yet Selene's sincerity was undeniable, and the memory of her partial transformation, her shimmering tattoos, was etched into his mind with vivid clarity. And so, in the gloom of that subway corridor, a fragile alliance formed. Adrian took a breath, and for the first time in his measured, structured life, he stepped off the ledge of certainty and into the uncharted depths of cosmic intrigue. If Selene and her people were in danger, if Earth's leaders were being manipulated by the renegade Elari, then he would use every resource at his disposal to help. What he did not yet know was that Selene, too, faced a predicament of profound significance. The Elari abided by a law older than any earthly code. If an alien's true identity was revealed to a human, the Elari must either erase that human's memory an invasive procedure that often left permanent damage, or form a life bond, enacting an ancient ritual that bound their futures together irrevocably. Selene had neither the tools nor the will to rob Adrian of his memories. As the days passed, she kept this tradition hidden, wrestling with her conscience. But the inexorable truth loomed. The time would come when she must choose. No one must know their secret, and yet, now he did. The stage was set, and the next act was about to begin. In the days that followed, Adrian and Selene moved cautiously through a city turned hostile. They found refuge in an abandoned office building, where the floors groaned from years of neglect and the windows rattled in the wind. There, they could speak freely, away from prying eyes and advanced surveillance technology. In hushed tones, Selene revealed more of the tapestry that wove her life to the Elari. She told him of a lush homeworld with crystalline cities powered by harnessed starlight, a civilization that prized knowledge above all else, traveling the cosmos in search of new cultures to learn from. She recounted how, centuries ago, the Elari discovered Earth, noting its teeming biodiversity and boundless potential for growth. Their early ambassadors blended into human society like shadows at dusk, quietly gathering information, sharing subtle gifts of technology that spurred human innovation. Over time, the Elari established hidden enclaves, small communities that thrived in secrecy. They formed alliances with certain influential humans who swore to protect their existence. And though these alliances were delicate, they paved the way for peaceful coexistence. But not all shared this vision. Kael Draven emerged as a firebrand who believed in direct control. For him, secrecy was a pointless handicap. He argued that the Elari's superior technology and intellect granted them a moral imperative to guide humanity, to mold it in their image. When the council denied him, he and his loyalists turned rogue, vanishing into the vastness of Earth's shadowy underbelly. Now, Kale was poised to strike. According to Selene, he had developed a massive holographic disruptor, a device capable of revealing every Elari's true form across the globe. The impetus was clear. Once revealed, the Elari would be forced to either come forward openly or unleash a technological arsenal to protect themselves from human aggression. In the ensuing chaos, Kale aimed to position himself as the savior king of both species. How close is he to deploying this disruptor? Adrian asked quietly, mind whirring with the implications. I fear he is very close, Selene replied, glancing at the cracked window overlooking a deserted street. This pulse that struck me, that exposed me, may have been a test run. Adrian felt an urgent need to act. As a scientist, he understood the destructive potential of advanced technology unleashed upon an unsuspecting populace. But how could they stop Kale, with no resources, no allies? Selene had an answer, the life bond. While describing Elari tradition, she mentioned that once a bond was forged between an Elari and a human, they could share not only emotional ties, but also a measure of psychic resonance. This bond, in turn, allowed for a potent fusion of knowledge and power, a synergy that might just counter Kale's technology. Adrian listened, his rational mind grappling with the concept. Psychic resonance sounded like pure fantasy, yet he had seen enough in the past weeks to dispel easy skepticism. When Selene explained the nature of the ritual, however, she did so with a trembling voice. It was not a frivolous bond. It entwined souls, forging connections that defied ordinary comprehension. The bond also served a pragmatic purpose. Once sealed, no Elari would be forced to erase the humans' memories, for their fates would be irrevocably linked. But the choice could not be undone. It was akin to a marriage, but deeper, rooted in biology and cosmic law alike. How can this help us? Asked Adrian, fighting the swirl of emotion the notion stirred in him. A bonded pair can sense each other's presence, feel each other's thoughts in a limited sense, Selene explained. And more importantly, the Council recognizes a bonded pair as a single unit. It might grant us the authority to challenge Kale more directly, to rally what remains of the Loyalists. If the Council sees that I have chosen to bond with a human, it will prove that I'm committed to Earth's fate. They may lend their support. Even as she spoke, Adrian could see the turmoil in her eyes. It was not an easy thing to speak of for an Elari to reveal such intimate cultural secrets to an outsider. He realized that she was sacrificing a portion of her own safety for his. She was revealing these truths because time was running out, and their chance of survival depended on forging trust, no matter how frightening. In his mind, rational arguments collided. Was it wise to form a mystical bond with an extraterrestrial being he had only recently come to know, no matter how intriguing she was? Yet every time he looked at her, he sensed a deep sincerity and a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the path destiny had laid out for them both. "Selene," he said softly, "I'm not opposed to it, if it can protect us, if it can help us stop Kale. But are you certain this is the only way?" Her gaze dropped to her hands, fingers twisting in an uncharacteristic display of nervousness. "The only other way is for me to vanish and for you to forget all of this. But that would leave Kale unchecked. And it would destroy me to rob you of your memories after what you've done for me. I do not wish to see you harmed or oblivious. You deserve better." A hush settled over the darkened office, broken only by a distant horn blaring on the street below. At length, Adrian nodded, resolute. "Then let's do it, if you'll have me. Let us claim whatever bond we need to protect this world, to protect each other." A subtle relief passed across her features, though overshadowed by caution. She warned him that the ritual was not simple. They would need the assistance of an Elari guide, one trained in the old ways. They would also need a safe space, free from the prying eyes of Kale's forces. Gathering the required items, a specific arrangement of crystals, an infusion of synthetic compounds that mirrored the resonance of the Elari's homestar, would prove difficult. So began their quest, a clandestine journey through the hidden corners of the city. Selene used secret contacts, fellow Elari operating in the shadows, each risking exposure to aid them. Under the flickering neon lights of abandoned warehouses, they exchanged coded phrases, receiving vials of luminescent liquid. In once glorious libraries that had fallen into obscurity, they whispered incantations in an alien tongue, seeking old texts that detailed the bonding ceremony. Each step carried them deeper into a hidden world that coexisted with the everyday hustle of New York. In these hush-hush gatherings, Adrian witnessed the breadth of the Elari infiltration, a taxi driver who recognized Selene's sigil and nodded solemnly, refusing payment for the ride, a bartender whose eyes shimmered with faint aqua flecks, passing them a cryptic note with instructions, an elderly street performer who played the violin with mesmerizing skill, his subtle glance telling Selene that he, too, was an Elari in disguise. At times, Adrian felt overwhelmed, as though he was an unwitting actor dropped into a vast, interstellar drama. Yet each time he turned to Selene, her presence grounded him. Her strength, her unwavering determination, reminded him that despite all the unknowns, he was not alone. They were forging a path together, forging something deeper than mere friendship. Meanwhile, across the city, faint ripples of chaos grew. Strange anomalies in the power grid continued. Cryptic news reports circulated about mysterious lights in the sky, unexplained disruptions that some blamed on saboteurs or foreign cyber attacks. The general populace, blind to the Elari presence, grasped at rational explanations, while behind the scenes, Kael Draven drew nearer to unleashing his plan. Occasionally, black SUVs patrolled the streets, reminiscent of the group that had chased Selene. Their presence hammered home the reality of their peril. Adrian recalled the cold, ruthless expressions of those men, presumably Kale's agents, or perhaps human collaborators seeking personal gain in the new order he promised. At last, Selene's network led them to an unremarkable brownstone in a forgotten corner of Queens, where an aged Elari named Maveen resided under the guise of a reclusive scholar. Beneath the quaint decor of dusty tomes and antique rugs, a hidden chamber thrummed with ethereal energy. And there, in that secret sanctum, Maveen agreed to perform the bonding ritual. Adrian's heart pounded as Maveen prepared the ceremonial items, concentric rings of crystals that glowed with a soft, pulsating light, bowls of that luminescent liquid carefully arranged. The air felt charged, vibrating with unseen forces that transcended scientific explanation. Selene stood across from Adrian, her face solemn. She wore a simple, flowing garment that accentuated the faint glow of her eyes. Maveen began to chant in the Elari tongue, ancient syllables that thrummed with cosmic resonance. Adrian felt his heartbeat accelerate, as though in sync with the crystals pulsing. Then came the critical moment. Maveen handed Adrian a small crystal vial. Its contents shimmered with color-shifting radiance. "Drink," he instructed in heavily accented English, "and let your mind open." Adrian inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the decision. With a steady hand, he brought the vial to his lips. The liquid was cool, tasting faintly metallic and something sweet he could not identify. Almost instantly, his senses heightened. He felt a warmth spread through his veins, and the edges of his vision blurred into soft streams of light. Selene, too, imbibed the same solution. Maveen's chanting grew louder. The crystals at their feet flared, casting dancing reflections along the walls. Adrian's thoughts turned liquid, as though merging into a swirling vortex of color and sensation. And then, in a rush like a distant star going supernova, he felt Selene's presence within him. It was not an intrusion, not a possession, but a gentle melding of awareness. He perceived fragments of her memories, her childhood on a floating city perched above an azure sea, her wonder at Earth's diversity, her sorrow at the cruelty inflicted by Kale's faction. He felt her heartache, her hopes, her deep longing for acceptance. Simultaneously, she perceived him, his diligent years in medical research, his quiet loneliness in the crowded city, his buried longing for a life less ordinary. In that shared intimacy, all barriers dissolved. They understood each other with a clarity that transcended words. Tears shimmered in Selene's otherworldly eyes, and Adrian realized that his own cheeks were damp. Mavine's voice rang through the chamber, resonating with a triumphant note. A final swell of energy coursed through the crystals, coalescing into a brilliant flash of light that enveloped them both. When the radiance subsided, Adrian felt changed, as though a hidden dimension of his being had awakened. He glanced at Selene, who smiled, the bond alive between them. Mavine offered a satisfied nod. The ceremony was complete. With the bond sealed, Adrian felt a renewed sense of courage. He no longer moved solely by logic or duty, but by an overwhelming desire to protect Selene, to stand at her side against the darkness gathering on Earth's horizon. For her part, Selene radiated confidence, as though the synergy of their connection granted her new strength. But even as they emerged from the hidden chamber, the outside world reminded them of the danger. An urgent message reached Mavine via a cryptic phone call. A close ally had intercepted intelligence that Kael Draven would activate the mass holographic disruptor within hours. The device, hidden beneath a repurposed military facility on the outskirts of the city, was set to broadcast a planet-wide pulse that would reveal every Elari in existence. Time was running out. Adrian and Selene locked eyes, their newly forged bond humming with shared resolve. They had only one option: confront Kale directly, sabotage the disruptor, and expose his twisted plot. If they failed, Earth would erupt in hysteria over the sudden revelation of alien life, an event that could spiral into war, ensuring Draven's catastrophic ascendancy. Thus, in the waning light of dusk, they set forth, armored with their bond, guided by the faint threads of trust woven among the Elari scattered throughout the city. They prepared to face an enemy who not only threatened Earth, but the future of both species. Their path was fraught with peril, but for the first time, Adrian felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose grander than any he had ever known. He reached for Selene's hand. She clasped his firmly, her eyes glinting with determination. Together, they stepped into the twilight, hearts entwined, ready to defy the shadows that lay in wait. Kael Draven stood amid the cavernous depths of what had once been a top-secret military bunker. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed, casting a cold sheen on the labyrinth of equipment and wires snaking across the concrete floors. The disruptor loomed at the center like some monstrous altar, a tower of gleaming steel and swirling energy conduits harnessing the dormant power of alien technology. With sharp features and a proud, almost regal bearing, Kale watched a console's readings flash across multiple screens. He was tall like Selene, sharing the elongated grace typical of the Elari. Yet his eyes held a feral edge, a lust for dominance that contrasted sharply with Selene's quieter dignity. Clad in an impeccably tailored suit, an affectation for the human world he strove to conquer, Kale exuded the chilling calm of a predator who knew the hunt was nearing completion. Behind him, a half-dozen human technicians, lured into his service by whispered promises of power, hovered nervously over the control panels. The electromagnetic emitter was nearly ready, the final calibrations underway. Soon, once the disruptor was fully charged, Kale would unleash a global wave that would strip every Elari of their human disguise. He allowed himself a thin smile. When fear gripped the planet and confusion reigned, he would step forward as the orchestrator of it all, offering stability in exchange for subservience. The Council would be forced to negotiate with him, or face open war with a terrified human populace. He had no doubt that lesser Elari would flock to him, seeing no other option. The dream of a new empire, bridging both worlds under his iron command, was at hand. His musings were interrupted by a chirping alarm on a secondary monitor. Kale's silver eyebrows arched. One of the technicians glanced his way, face pale. "Sir," the technician stammered, "we've detected unauthorized movement in the perimeter. Our remote sensors indicate multiple life signs. They're approaching quickly." Kale clenched his jaw. "The authorities?" "Doubtful. They move with stealth, not the standard formation the police or any official unit would use." A flicker of insight crossed Kale's face. "Selene," he murmured. "She would be foolish enough to attempt a direct assault, especially if she's bonded with a human. So, the council must be involved." He motioned to a squad of black-clad operatives standing at attention near the bunker's entrance. "Ready yourselves. Stop them before they breach the central chamber. If possible, capture Selene alive. Kill the human. He's of no use to us." A wave of tension rippled through the room. The operatives nodded, weapons gleaming under the sterile lights, and rushed to intercept the intruders. Kale turned back to the disruptor, fingers dancing over the console. "Just a little more time," he murmured to himself. "And then the world changes forever." Outside, Selene and Adrien crouched behind a pile of rubble that had once been part of an outer security wall. Faint lights illuminated the bunker's reinforced gates, patrolled by armed men. Selene's connection to Adrien vibrated with adrenaline, and he sensed both her apprehension and her unwavering resolve. They weren't alone. Two loyalist Elari, Taryn and Cirrus, accompanied them, clad in unassuming black attire, but ready to unleash a small arsenal of advanced weaponry and illusions if needed. An eclectic group of human allies, fringe hackers, rebellious scientists fed up with clandestine manipulation, provided remote support, monitoring security feeds, and jamming communications. It was a desperate coalition, bonded by the shared goal of preventing Kale's catastrophe. "We have to breach that gate," Taryn whispered, gesturing to the bunker entrance. "But we expect heavy resistance." Cirrus nodded. "Once inside, we need to reach the disruptor's core. Even if we can't disable it permanently, we can sabotage or overload it, by enough time for the council to mobilize a full strike." Selene stole a glance at Adrien, and he felt her silent question through their bond. "Are you ready for this?" He offered a small nod, heart pounding. He felt no small amount of terror, but also a fierce loyalty to Selene. With her, he was prepared to face the unimaginable. They initiated a swift assault. Cirrus unleashed a device that projected a brief electromagnetic pulse. Ironically, a lesser version of the same principle Kale planned to exploit, disabling the guard's night vision gear and sending perimeter drones spiraling out of control. Simultaneously, Taryn fired a tranquilizer dart that dropped one guard before he could sound an alarm. Adrien and Selene darted forward, sprinting across the open ground, hearts in their throats. Then, the gate exploded inwards. Kale's operatives poured out, armed with advanced rifles that spat sizzling bolts of energy rather than mere bullets. Taryn and Cirrus responded with their own alien weapons, arcs of shimmering light that cut through the gloom. The night erupted with streaks of fire and brilliant discharges, an eerie ballet of technology beyond standard human comprehension. Amid the chaos, Selene pressed forward, instincts honed by her otherworldly lineage guiding her with agility that bordered on supernatural. Adrien followed, uncertain but determined, a hastily acquired sidearm clutched in his shaking hands. The bond with Selene steadied him, fueling a sense of calm resolve that belied his novice status in combat. One of Kale's operatives took aim at Adrien. Time seemed to slow as a luminous projectile flared toward him. Selene moved instantly, her body twisting in a graceful arc, intercepting the shot with a small, shimmering shield device that flickered to life at her wrist. She staggered from the impact, a grimace etching across her face. Concern burst through Adrien's mind. He felt her pain echo in their bond. A sharp sting, then a fierce will to endure. "Focus," he told himself. They had to get inside. With a final push, they reached the interior corridors of the bunker. Bare concrete walls pressed in on them, corridors branching off like a labyrinth. Cirrus led the way, scanning for life signs on a handheld device. Alarms blared, red emergency lights painting the halls in a sinister glow. Behind them, Taryn and Cirrus tried to delay pursuit, setting up barricades and sabotage. But more operatives closed in, and gunfire echoed in the claustrophobic corridors. Time was of the essence, for every passing second brought Kale closer to initiating his disruptor. At last, they arrived at the central chamber, the heart of Kale's machinations. The door, a massive slab of reinforced steel, glowed with embedded security panels. Selene quickly interfaced with the system using an alien device that emitted coded pulses of light and sound. The door shuddered, then slid open with a deafening clang. Inside, Kale awaited them, a satisfied smirk curling his lips. Flanking him were more operatives in tactical gear. The disruptor tower pulsed in the background, arcs of energy snapping across coils, a sure sign that activation was near. Monitors displayed global maps, waves of data streaming in real time, the countdown at less than 15 minutes. "So you've come," Kale said, spreading his arms as though to welcome them. "I must applaud your audacity, Selene. You've always had spirit." Selene's eyes narrowed. "Kale, you must stop this. You'll force a global crisis, spark fear and hatred on an unprecedented scale." He gave a cold laugh. "That is the unfortunate byproduct of progress. Our people have hidden for too long. Humanity will thank me, in time, for hastening this unification." His gaze flicked to Adrian. "And you brought your pet human. How quaint. I can sense the bond between you two. Did you truly stoop so low as to chain yourself to one of them? The Council's traditions reek of weakness." Adrian bristled, but stayed focused. He felt Selene's anxiety roil through their connection. Kale was not merely a rebel, but a formidable adversary steeped in advanced knowledge and cunning. "Enough talk," she snapped. "We're shutting you down." Kale sighed theatrically, then nodded to his operatives. "Make it quick." The chamber erupted into chaos. Energy blasts ricocheted off columns and walls, flaring in wild patterns. Selene and Adrian dived behind a control console, returning fire with the meager weapon they possessed. Meanwhile, Terran and Cirrus launched a flanking attack, but Kale's men were relentless. Beneath the shriek of weaponry, the disruptor's hum climbed in pitch, a high-pitched whine that rattled the very air. A digital display read, 00:14:09, and counting down. Each second hammered in Adrian's chest like a drumbeat of impending doom. In the maelstrom, Kale strode calmly toward the disruptor controls. Terran lunged to intercept him, but Kale merely raised a hand. A corona of shimmering light coursed from his fingertips, striking Terran full force, sending him sprawling. The rogue Elari's mastery of telekinetic-like powers, boosted by stolen energy from advanced Earth technology, was fearsome. Adrian locked eyes with Selene. Through their bond, an unspoken plan crystallized. They had to destroy the disruptor, or at least disrupt its function. But how? It was reinforced with layers of alien and human engineering. Approaching it meant exposing themselves to Kale's wrath. Selene took a calming breath. "I'll face Kale. You handle the disruptor. There's a central power conduit near the base. If you can overload it with an energy feedback loop, you might fry the core before it triggers globally." Adrian hesitated. "But..." She squeezed his hand, eyes shimmering with both fear and defiance. "Trust in our bond." Before he could protest, she sprang into action, sprinting across open floor in a blur of alien grace. Kale raised an eyebrow, hurling another telekinetic strike at her. Selene conjured a defensive field, though the impact staggered her. They circled each other, cosmic energies crackling in the air. Their confrontation was like some mythic duel from ancient legends, shimmering sigils glowing along their limbs, attuned to the cosmic powers of the Elari. Meanwhile, Adrian dashed to the disruptor's main control station. Bullets and blasts whizzed around him. With trembling fingers, he retrieved a small hacking device a human ally had given him. He attached it to the console, praying it would bypass the alien encryption. The screen flickered, lines of code scrawling in rapid succession. A shout tore Adrian's attention away. Terran was pinned down by multiple operatives, while Cirrus desperately tried to drag him to safety. Fear clutched Adrian's gut, but he pushed on, inputting commands to redirect the disruptor's energy. The console beeped, resisting each attempt. He cursed under his breath. The countdown read 12 minutes and 20 seconds. Behind him, Selene and Kale clashed in a dazzling display of Elari power. Selene's eyes flared aqua, the sigils on her skin igniting. Kale's energy glowed a harsh silver, rippling in waves across the chamber. Selene launched a burst of telekinetic force, sending him staggering into a steel column. But Kale recovered swiftly, hurling a wave of stinging electricity. Selene cried out as the charge arced through her shield, singing her garment and scorching her arm. Adrian felt her agony spike in his mind, a flash of searing pain. He nearly doubled over, but forced himself to remain on task. "Focus," he whispered to himself. For her. He typed furiously, bypassing layers of alien security. The hacking device beeped in triumphant intervals as it accessed deeper systems. A readout flickered, indicating the disruptor's power levels. Adrian triggered an override sequence. Lights on the main console shifted from green to yellow, warning sirens echoing overhead. Yes, progress. The disruptor's hum wavered, the pitch fluctuating. But Kale sensed the intrusion. With a roar, he unleashed a brutal attack, flinging Selene back against a row of cables. She collapsed, gasping, her protective shield flickering. Adrian's heart lurched in his chest. Kale turned his fierce gaze upon Adrian, eyes alight with savage fury. He strode toward the console, ignoring the sparking arcs that leapt from the disruptor's coils. "You meddling whelp," he snarled. "You think you can foil my destiny?" Adrian scrambled back as Kale raised his hand. A jolt of luminous force crackled through the air. Adrian braced himself, fully expecting to be struck down, but at the last moment, a surge of energy from behind slammed into Kale, knocking him off balance. Selene, battered and bloodied, yet unbroken, had rallied for one last assault. Weakened though she was, Selene poured the entirety of her will into the telekinetic burst. For a moment, Kale faltered, forced to defend himself against the barrage. Adrian seized the chance, jamming the final command into the console. The disruptor's energy reading spiked. The system beeped an urgent warning. A meltdown scenario was imminent if the sequence was not aborted. Lights flashed red. Sirens wailed. The disruptor's coils hissed and snapped with overload. Kale's eyes widened in alarm. This was not the controlled unveiling he intended. It was chaos that threatened to consume the entire facility and possibly them all. With a scream of rage, he turned away from Selene, frantically inputting commands to stabilize the device. Sparks showered the chamber as the disruptor's tower began to convulse, the swirling energy spinning out of alignment. Adrian rushed to Selene, supporting her trembling body. He felt her consciousness flickering through their bond, exhaustion tugging at her. "We have to get out of here," he muttered. But Kale, half-crazed, was still at the console, trying desperately to salvage his grand plan. Terran and Cirrus, wounded, crawled toward the exit. The few remaining operatives lay unconscious or fled. The meltdown countdown beeped relentlessly. Summoning the last reserves of her strength, Selene raised her hand. A luminous circle shimmered around Kale, the ancient binding technique of the Elari. His limbs jerked, pinned by invisible chains. He snarled, fighting to break free. "Stop it, Kale," Selene gasped. "You've lost." In a final, desperate act, Kale wrenched free from the binding. His eyes blazed with mad determination. "If I cannot have my empire, then I'll bring us all to ruin." He slammed a fist onto the console's meltdown override, disabling any chance to contain the rapidly building energy. The disruptor tower screeched like a wounded beast. Arcs of lightning danced, scorching the walls, gnawing at the very foundations. Adrian helped Selene to her feet, panic clawing at him. If the disruptor went critical, the blast could devastate the region, possibly more. Then, unexpectedly, a swirling halo of energy crackled around Kale. "I'll survive this," he sneered. "You, however, will not." The renegade Elari began to transform, channeling raw cosmic power. But the disruptor's meltdown outpaced him. Before he could fully shield himself, a colossal pulse erupted from the tower. The shockwave slammed into Kale, throwing him across the chamber. Concrete walls splintered, steel beams buckled. Adrian dove for cover with Selene, shielding her from debris. The sonic roar deafened them. Panels burst in showers of sparks, and thick smoke filled the air. When the din subsided, Adrian coughed, peering through choking dust. The disruptor was a twisted ruin, half collapsed upon itself. Kale lay unconscious or worse, pinned beneath a mass of fallen metal. The meltdown, it seemed, had shorted out the device rather than unleashing a full-scale explosion across the globe. Somehow, they had averted planetary catastrophe. But the facility was caving in around them. With adrenaline surging, Adrian guided Selene toward the exit. Terran and Cirrus helped each other, limping away from the destruction. In the corridor, partial ceiling collapses forced them to backtrack. Flames licked at the walls. Yet at last, they found a breach in the outer structure. Under a starless sky, they staggered clear, battered and dazed, but alive. A thunderous rumble marked the final collapse of the bunker, sealing Kale's unholy device within the earth, entombed in twisted steel. They collapsed onto the cold ground, sirens echoing in the distance. Adrian cradled Selene's head, tears of relief sliding down his soot-streaked cheeks. Through the bond, he felt her heartbeat steady, her life force brightening. They had done the impossible. They had stopped Kael Draven. For a moment, the world was quiet around them. Terran and Cirrus looked on, battered but triumphant. The horizon showed faint glimmers of dawn, as if nature itself applauded the victory that would remain a secret to most of humanity. Selene stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She gazed at Adrian with profound gratitude. "We did it," she whispered, voice trembling. He nodded, voice choked with emotion. Together. In that shared breath, they felt the bond resonate with renewed warmth, a promise of hope for the days to come. They had torn down the path to destruction, preserving the delicate veil that separated humans and Elari. Despite the challenges that lay ahead, explaining the destroyed facility, dealing with the unknown fate of Kale, rallying the council, at that moment, they simply savored the triumph of survival. Eventually, emergency responders arrived, perplexed by reports of an explosion at an abandoned site. Selene, Terran, and Cirrus faded into the shadows, needing to maintain their anonymity. Adrian offered what plausible story he could, a freak accident, no one else inside. The details might never fully make sense to the investigators, but the official narrative would likely bury the truth. In the afterglow of dawn, Adrian and Selene found themselves walking through the quiet streets, supporting each other. The city that had once been a backdrop to Adrian's mundane life now seemed full of unspoken possibilities. For not only did he carry a cosmic bond with an alien being, he had glimpsed a broader tapestry of life, one that stretched beyond Earth's horizon. They returned briefly to Adrian's apartment, scorched, disheveled, but mercifully intact. The ordeal had been harrowing, yet the warmth of the rising sun offered solace. Selene slumped onto a worn armchair, sighing in relief. Adrian brought her water, tenderly examining the burns on her arm. Through the bond, he sensed her gratitude, her affection. "Thank you," she said softly. "You risked everything for me, for my people." He shook his head. "I did it for both our worlds. And for you." He paused, meeting her eyes. "So, what happens now?" She gazed at him, her alien eyes brimming with compassion. "The council will know what happened. They might formally recognize our bond, bringing me back into the fold. I'll stay here for a time, helping them root out any remnants of Kale's network, ensuring no one tries to rebuild his disruptor." Adrian felt a small pang of uncertainty. "And after that?" Selene offered a hopeful smile. "The Elari never intended to conquer Earth, only to learn from it. Perhaps, in time, we'll find a way for both species to stand openly together, without fear. Until that day comes, I want to remain with you, if that is your wish." His heart swelled with a rush of emotion. He knew their lives would be far from simple, overshadowed by secrets and potential dangers. But the bond, the love, forging between them felt as real as the ground beneath his feet. He drew her into a gentle embrace, feeling the rhythmic cadence of her breath, the subtle glow of her alien heritage. "Yes," he murmured. "I want that too." Together, they watched the sun climb above the city skyline. Sirens faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet buzz of New York awakening to another day. In that peaceful interlude, they found a sense of belonging, each to the other, forging the promise of a brighter future. And though the rest of humanity continued in oblivious slumber, unaware of how close they had come to the brink, Adrian Wells and Selene Voss, Elari and human, bound by an ancient ritual, stood on the threshold of a new dawn. They had faced betrayal, confronted unimaginable technology, and emerged stronger for it. The bond they shared, like a cosmic tapestry woven from threads of destiny, would guide them through any challenges that lay ahead. No one must know the hidden truths that lurked beneath everyday reality. But in the quiet hush of that new morning, two souls, forever linked, reclaimed their right to happiness. The alien bonding ritual had begun in secrecy, forged in peril, yet its culmination was a testament to trust, loyalty, and the indomitable power of hope. And at the end of it all, both Adrian and Selene dared to dream of a future that might unite their worlds in harmony, rather than tear them apart.